Love your city, every back road, every alley, every pothole. Love your city, every back road. Come together, fight for your home.
What's up, everyone? This is Bob Dalton with the Love Your City podcast. Each episode, I interview people that are doing grassroots work in their communities. This episode, I have the privilege of interviewing Ryan Lampa. He's the founder of People Loving Nashville. And we're sitting here in Nashville right now for the interview. And we're joined by a friend, Eric Sampson, project manager for Love Your City. And yeah, man, thank you for spending time with me. And thank you for taking this interview on less than a week's notice.
It's all good, man.
We were connected by a mutual friend, Jeremy Cowart. Many people love that man. He's a staple here in Nashville.
He is.
Artist and creative. And he was gracious enough to introduce us. So I'm stoked to spend some time with you.
Yeah, any friend of his, man. Definitely.
Yeah, he's
Looking
awesome.
forward to the conversation.
People that get into this type of work, doing grassroots work and building a nonprofit and stuff, they don't just typically fall into it or wake up one day and they're like doing it. Something typically happened in their lives, or there was some sort of monumental moment in their life. Looking back in your life, was there something that happened to spark the interest or something that you noticed that caused you to want to get involved in this type of work?
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I lived off of there's a main drag here in Nashville called West End. It's next to this big park, and I was living the single life, 25 years old. I was traveling for my work, was touring, and there was an abandoned house, literally outside the front doors of my house. You open the front doors, cross this alley, abandoned house. And so there was two gentlemen that went to that stoop of the backyard and to live. Man, so I grew up in a Christian family, grew up in a Christian home, and I had these kind of vague ideas as to what Christians should do in regards to those that are in need. And to be quite honest with you, to put it really succinctly, I was having too much fun in life. And I was like, I feel like if I change my life, I'm going to have to become a martyr and give up everything. And I wasn't ready to do it. I had a friend that was working with me at the time. He would come to my house and we would do work together. And he was like, man, I'm going to go talk to those guys. I was like, dude, please don't. You get to go home and I have to stay here. And if you break that veil, then who knows what's going to happen, right? So it was about a few weeks of him just being like, all right, dude, let's go. Let's just go talk to him. And so I said, all right, fine. And we went down there and sat on the stoop for 2 hours with these dudes. And man, I was blown away by their story. I mean, they had served in Vietnam War together, and then they lost each other after the war, and then they found each other on the streets of Nashville. So I was astonished about that camaraderie, that brotherly, kind of looking after each other sort of thing. And then I got to know them as people, not just oh, I'm this certain kind of person and you're this certain kind of person. And if we are friends or if we have a relationship, then I need to change myself completely. No, it was, I had it wrong. Looking back, I'm like, oh, it was because I got to know them that I changed. I didn't have to change for them. They changed me. And in a really beautiful way.
And you weren't trying to change them.
No. Honestly, I didn't even want to talk to him. I was like, dude, this is way above my head. It's not like I felt like I was better than them. I was like, oh no, I'm not qualified to help or even be friends, with folks that are in need. And I just got to know. So I'll tell you a quick story. So I was like, okay, now I'm going to really change their life, after a few weeks of getting to know them. So I got a bunch of money out of the bank, $200 worth of $5 bills. And I was like, all right. So one of the guys' name was Ron. That was the dude that I probably most gravitated towards. And he came to my door and I was like, all right, I got an idea. I'm going to give you a $5 bill every time you come to my house, as long as you give me a receipt that says you bought food or water. And you can do this 10 times a day if you want. If you want to come back, I'll give you another $5 bill. And dude, I was like, what do you think? And he slammed the door in my face. I didn't see him for 2 weeks, which was a long time. Came back 2 weeks later and I was like, what happened, man? He's like, dude, you think that all these things that you're, food and water, you think that's going to change my experiencing homelessness journey right now? You think that's going to change my depression, my addiction? You think it's going to change who I am and what I'm doing with my life? You've got it all wrong. I just want to be your friend. And I, again, I told you I grew up in the Christian home and still a Christian to this day. And so at that point, I used that as an opportunity to pray. And I was like, all right, God, teach me what I'm missing. I'm missing something here. And so I just hit my knees and said, God, can you show me? And the next few weeks were just like a wild roller coaster of just meeting people, some living on the streets, some just getting out of jail. It was wild. The opportunities that I had when I just said, all right, God, when you have to show me something here. And I think I just like widened my vision to be like, okay, I'm open to finding out what's going on in my city or even with myself in regards to those that are in need. So that was a huge catalyst at the beginning. And so we just got together with some friends. I said I worked in the music business. I toured with this guy named Toby Mack. We toured, I toured with him for like 14 years. And there were some roadies on that crew that I was like, hey, we get off on Mondays. We hit the, get off the bus on Monday morning, go take a shower, drink some coffee, take a nap, and let's get together on like a Monday afternoon and let's just go make some food for people that might be hungry. So we started with a handful of meals. Then it turned into like 10. Then 15, then 20, 50, 100, 150, really fast. Within like 3 or 4 months, we were serving up between 100 and 150 meals, like out of a tiny house, like 2 tiny little like stoves. And I learned really fast that you can't cook food like really fast in a crock pot. Like that was so like how bachelor I was. I was like, oh, it'll take like 30 minutes in the crock pot. And one of the ladies that was coming, she's like, dude, it takes like 8 hours. I was like, 8 hours? That's crazy. Who has 8 hours to cook food? Yeah. So we learned really fast and it was a really ragtag thing, man. We started to ask for donations on the road while we were touring. And the weird thing, if you think about it, like that's a terrible place to ask for clothing donations. Like everybody's showing up with their suitcases, but somehow we had donations every single week to give out on the streets of Nashville. And it started, we all had jobs and this was just a thing we did on Mondays.
And what year was that?
2008.
2008.
Yeah.
And then when it came to what you learned from Ron about, not necessarily just giving people out like a handout or whatever, and that he kind of was calling you into this more relational journey. How did you try to did that always stay in the back of your mind when you were starting to distribute food and supplies and stuff in 2008?
Early on, we always looked at it as that was like the vehicle that we arrived in on, was just bringing hospitality, right? So in Matthew 25, again, we read the scriptures and it's give food to the hungry, drink to the thirsty, welcome the stranger, and put clothing on the backs that need clothing. And so we're like, all right, let's just follow that. But that third one, welcoming the stranger, was an interesting thing for us to participate in. So we talk about this often here at People Loving Nashville. It's like, at the beginning, we're like, hey, welcome, come on, welcome to our thing. And I was inviting guys that were literally sleeping on a bench. And I was saying, hey, welcome to what we have going on for the next hour on your front doorstep. Right? It was just so silly. So we're like, okay, hang on a second. So we'd go out to dinner afterwards usually, or go back to somebody's house and we would just sit down and be like, all right, what did you learn? What was happening? It was just a really cool community that was just like churning and talking about this stuff. And we've quickly realized, oh, dude, we're the strangers. They're not strangers, right? Of course, there's people that we don't know each other, but we're much more foreign to that person's front doorstep, quite literally. And so we were like, are we being welcomed as the stranger? And is that okay? Because we're the ones with the money and we're the haves and they're the have-nots. And we're like 25 years old, just like putting these pieces together. And then we're like, heck yeah, that's okay. And we're like, okay, that might be what community looks like. Is this what community is? You know what I mean?
How many people were with you serving or kind of getting together?
Yeah, so at the beginning, it was like 5, but no joke, within a month, I think we had like 25 to 30 in my tiny little house. Like people just called friends. We had kids in there. Like it just like caught fire really fast.
And it was purely based on the service and the distribution of resources.
Yeah. And you know what? I would say that's what I think a lot of people thought it was when they first came. And then that's not what sustained it. What sustained it was the community aspect of it. Because like, I described we went out to dinner and stuff, but actually what we did in the very beginning, I just remember this, like the very beginning, so when we found out that it takes 8 hours to cook food in a crock pot, we're like, okay, let's not do that for the main meal that we distribute, but let's put some red beans and rice on So when we're done serving, let's come back to my house. And so what we do, we put red beans and rice on, and then we'd go cook the meal in the kitchen, right? We'd go serve and we'd come back. And I would say, anybody's welcome as long as you bring something to drink or some French bread. Because like, red beans and rice can only go so far, but French bread makes it extend. So we're like, okay. So people would show up with just giant loaves of French bread and like whatever. We'd have like wine and like Pepsi and Sprite and dude, we'd have like 35 people, young people, 20 somethings in this tiny house. It was hot. And we'd put on some music and we'd sit on the floor and just discuss and share and churn and struggle through like, is this okay? And then, hey, I was talking to my buddy tonight and he was pretty mad about this, or like, hey, this person's going through this. How do we love on this guy? And oh, something's happening inside me. Like I saw a child on the streets early on. I was like, I don't know what to do with that.
And so you were passing out all this stuff on Monday nights, and was it a different night that you guys would gather and have dinner? And
no, it was the same night.
And then you would go out after the dinner?
So we would go serve downtown, right? So we would pack like at 4:00 at my house, pack all the meals together, get all the clothing together, and we would pray and like read some scriptures and then go downtown, distribute the meals and the clothing. And then after that was done, we'd come back to my house and have a meal there. So it was so the day would be like Monday from 4 p.m. to easily midnight. I mean, we were all like 20 somethings with like, weird jobs and stuff. So it was,
those are such great days, man.
Oh, dude, it was so awesome. And it was funny because I'm like thinking now I'm going to be 40 this year. I'm like, oh, that sounds awesome. But I have 3 kids now and I don't know if that's sustainable in that.
Yeah. Well, how far into it were you kind of like looking around as kind of the leader of the group and going, I think this is turning into something, like something bigger than just like a weekly gathering.
Yeah.
At what point were you like, I think that we need to put a name to this and form it into an organization that could be bigger than this group?
Totally. That's a great question. So I'll tell you exactly the moment that we were like, we should put a name to this thing. Because at first we were like, we don't want to be a nonprofit. We don't want to have a name. We are just people coming together to feed people. That's it. That's all we're doing. And we wanted to stay away from all that stuff of like signing up for a 501c3 and everything. And then 2 things happened. One, so this was back in the day of like T9 texting. Remember T9 texting? Like corrective text, like you like type in there and it's like really hard to text people. So like people were asking for directions to my house and I'd have to T9 text them directions to my house. Like there was no GPS. Like GPS was like not even a thing yet. And so that became a pain in the butt.
Like when you pass the oak tree.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and you hit the speed bump, like take a ride.
Left. Yeah, and it was weird because I literally lived in an alley, like downtown. So I was like getting tired of that. And then I was like, all right. So I just gotten a new like MacBook, whatever you call it. It wasn't even a MacBook back then, whatever it was called, a G4 PowerBook or whatever. And with it came a free .Mac email address. This is like when it first all was starting. And like, so then there was a way to get a free website. And I was like, okay, perfect. Let's just do a website with directions to my house. Awesome. Okay. So we got together with like the core volunteers. We're like, all right, what do we call the website? And so we're just like, all right, what are we doing? Okay. We're people. Great. Awesome. What are we doing? We're feeding. We're loving. Let's just do that. People loving. Peopleloving.com. Already taken. Peoplelovingpeople.com. Already taken. We're like, People Loving Nashville. Not taken. Take it.
Nice.
Because we were just like, we just need direction to get to my house.
Yeah.
So then that's when the website started. We're like, oh, I guess we're called People Loving Nashville. But we never put any signs up or anything. We're like, that's just the website. Right. And then my friend came to me and he said, hey, I want to give you $1,000 towards what you're doing. I'm like, oh my gosh. We literally like this little, I don't know if you're listening, you're not going to be able to see this, but there's like a multicolored bag on my shelf. That bag was literally, it was on my like couch and there was a little sign that said money for the poor. That was how we fundraise. People just walk in and put like $1 or $2 in there. We turn it upside down, count the money, and then that's how much we chose to spend on the meal every week. And sometimes we didn't have enough at all in the very beginning. And it was like, oh my gosh, my friend was saying he's going to bring us $1,000. It's huge. We're like, awesome. He's like, can I get a receipt? And I'm like, sure. For what? And he's like, for taxes, you know?
You like scribbled something on a napkin for him?
I'm no joke. I was like Googling, how do you, receipt for 501? I don't even know what this is. Mm-hmm. And then he's like, oh, you guys aren't a nonprofit. And I was like, yeah, we're not.
You're
He's
like, what's a nonprofit? No, just kidding.
no joke. I was like, I'm not sure exactly what that does, you know? So I dove into that, and thank God there was a gal named Kyla. Shout out to Kyla. She
So
knew about what was going on with this. And then also she was a core volunteer, and then she knew about applying for 501c3. She's like, okay, might be a good idea to do that. And I talked to a lawyer. Lawyer was like, yeah, what happens if somebody chokes on a chicken bone? You know, who are they going to come after? And I looked around, I was like, yeah, what happens?
You're like,
if
we don't
somebody-
even eat chicken, man.
Exactly, man. We don't got any bones in this thing. But like, you know, I thought about that. I was like, yeah, they might probably come after this place. You know, I was like, I don't know what to do, but so many people are like, dude, just do the nonprofit thing. So doing that though, I love the structure of nonprofit, you know, very, you know, transparent, you know, and like really cool opportunities of accountability with a board of directors and so many things. I was like, oh, this is actually awesome. So I loved it. I love organization. I love business administration stuff. And I was like, I'm really down with this, what this brought. So yeah, that was pivotal to be like, okay, now we have a name, People Loving Nashville. And then we just kind of continued on that path, but we stayed what we call just really bing bong for a long time. Like 2008 till about 4 years ago, we were like, we hired a few part-time employees. One of those is my sister, Colleen. She became like the kitchen master and like was like running the organization like on the Monday night things. And then I was still doing the administrative stuff, but also doing, you know, the outreach stuff as well. And then it just started to grow even further. And we had opportunities, especially during COVID, to expand. So yeah, 4 years ago, we added another outreach. We started to see other opportunities, folks that were just getting no resources here in town, like zero, like just in camps and like hadn't seen anybody for months because of the virus. And it was just, we're like, wait, nobody's going out there? Like we should go check them out. And so we sent people into there, started adding more meals. And we're like, oh my gosh, there's another opportunity. We're getting people into housing now. We, you know, just because you're into housing doesn't mean the story's over. Like, let's continue our community and relationship and bringing relief as well. So our pillars are relief, community, connection, and then restoration. So relief by food and clothing and something to drink and, you know, whatever, like emergency supplies, and then building on that to community. So that's the vehicle we're arriving on, and then community, doing it every single week, you know, building an actual friendship, then connection. So we hired, you know, through COVID, we hired a bunch of folks to like specifically address the issues in a systematic way, to walk with people, journey with people through, you know, resources in town. And then restoration, we just started that this year, where we find that, okay, folks are now into housing. Let's continue that journey, but now with housing, and let's start talking about sustainability and even grief and trauma counseling, because that's a huge thing. You think about living on the streets even for like a day or two is seriously traumatizing. So
you went from Monday nights, 35 people, 30
Right.
people. And then you went from that to, you know, forming a nonprofit and starting to grow. What now, like literally like last week, break down like what a normal week looks like. What's the different things you have going on through the week?
Yeah, sure.
And where are you guys at from a volunteer standpoint?
Totally. So yeah, Monday nights, that's our main kind
Stayed
of
strong.
Yeah, totally.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, for the last almost 14 years, we haven't missed a Monday.
Wow.
We just were like, all right, let's do this as long as we possibly can. And we haven't missed one. It's wild. I mean, we've done it in sleet, snow, tornado sirens, the whole bit. And we love that. So that's kind of like, you know, our most, you know, our longest standing one. And we've become the largest, you know, outdoor gathering for those experiencing homelessness in Nashville. And we didn't even really mean to do that. We were just like, we're just going to continue to do this. Partner with a bunch of other organizations. So Monday night, like I best describe as a block party. We literally are bringing, you know, tons of food, tons of clothing, tons of resources. We partner with other organizations like Shower Up and Nashville Street Barbers. People are bringing showers and haircuts. We got pet care. We have physical health. We got mental health. I mean, all different kinds of things bolted onto it. So we'll serve in the summer between 300 and 400 people on a Monday night.
And what time and location?
Yeah. So downtown Nashville, War Memorial Plaza is what it's called. And it's an outdoor thing. So you can come here. We do all of our operations here. We pack up the clothing and the food and, you know, kind of talk about organization, because it's an operation, quite, you know, frankly.
Totally.
So we got, anywhere from 60 to 100 volunteers every single week just for that Monday night. So that's Monday night, the big block party thing downtown. It's awesome. We got music, and it's just very like, we want people to be like, find a safe breath and get some relief, and then find some friends and just be like, oh gosh, I can just take a, like I said, a breath and find connection to things if they need that as well. So Tuesday is, we have some, administrative things that happen during the day for the organization. Then at night, so we have two outreaches, Tuesday and Thursday, that we call home fullness as opposed to homelessness. So it's folks that have moved into housing. We bring those pillars there as well: relief, community, connection, restoration. So it's a dynamic thing. It doesn't look exactly, it's like the template's the same, but every week it looks a little different. So we bring food and clothing and supplies, and then build that community with both Tuesday and Thursday, different locations, bring volunteers to those outreaches. And it's really wonderful, opportunity to continue engaging in the journey. Cause it's like we've worked so hard to get folks into housing, and then we're not going to just say goodbye at that point. We're like, no, dude, we're going to continue to be friends and continue to be in relationship.
Yeah, I'm going to check it out tonight.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to the Thursday game. So then Wednesday during the day, that's when our outreach team goes into encampments, and they are working like one-on-one with folks that are experiencing homelessness right now. And so working on whatever resources or documentation, even just, mental health or physical health, sometimes addiction, resources, whatever they might need on the streets, we try to bring that and try to make it uncomplicated as best as possible. So that's Wednesday. And then Friday is very flexible, right? It's like, okay, what did we miss? Where's opportunities? And we just kind of capitalize on all that. Through the whole week, though, we have an outreach team that doesn't stop doing this. And it's kind of wild. Like, working in this field, you can't really say like this is a 9 to 5. You can do your best to put boundaries around that, which we really promote around here. But like, sometimes it's going to be what it's going to be. Trauma hits, crisis hits, and so we do the best that we can to respond to that, whether it be natural disaster, like there were some floods that happened, over the past year. I mean, multiple floods. And so we'll be like responding directly to the floods that are happening, because that floods camps. And there's people that have sadly lost their life, and people that have had their lives threatened because they're having to live outside and, choosing to live in these certain areas. And then when the water rises, like all of a sudden, it's like somebody's got to go to their aid. And so we're partnering with other organizations within the city, or partnering with the city as best as we can, and trying to bring relief there.
Yeah, that was my next question, was what does collaboration look like between People Loving Nashville and other There's a lot of incredible stuff that's happening around here with Home Street Home and the Bridge.
Yeah.
Do you guys collaborate as organizations, and what does that look like as far as really working together on whether it's resources or volunteers or programs or what does that look like?
Yeah, I would say that our main collaboration effort is going to be sharing resources and sharing communication. So through like COVID, the very beginning of COVID, it was like there was a ton of organizations that just needed to shut down, like way larger than us. Like, we don't have parents, we have the board of directors, obviously, but we don't have like a corporate, covering of anything. So we're just our own entity. So we can kind of do whatever we need to do. And we're seeing opportunity, we're going to go straight to it. Where we were actually being, advised like, hey, you might want to think about that, man. And we're like, dude, these guys are starving. Mm-hmm. And they literally said to me, I hadn't seen anybody for months. I haven't seen anybody, like nobody on the streets. I can't get into McDonald's where I normally go to get out of the heat. I'm like, oh my gosh, like your life is fundamentally shifted. And so we were like, these folks need food. They need water. So we need at least bring that, and then fresh clothing. And then, just like, hey, there's still resources out there. Let us help you navigate that. So through that, we kind of just really ramped up a natural communication amongst a good number of agencies here in Nashville. And so I've always looked at us like kind of small fries, which we sort of still are in regards to like the greater, bigger organizations, the multi-million-dollar organizations. We're still very grassroots. But we were invited to the table to have some conversations with some of those bigger organizations that have been doing, work for 30 years, So we got to have those conversations, and hey, maybe if we try it like this, what if we did it like this, and learn and glean and share. And so really cool collaborative efforts. There's some really key people in our city that really worked out some cool opportunities for us to share and have conversation for once. It was because of the pandemic that we were like, okay, this is way past our ideals or our philosophies or how we feel like we should be doing things. Like, let's all sit at the same table and go, all right, what are we doing here? And there was a lot of funding that came in, federally. And so we didn't take any of that directly, but we were able to work with other organizations being subcontracted, and then also being able to kind of leverage that relationship. So if you can kind of imagine, we're like a street outreach arm is what it's called technically. Like, we're out in the streets, like talking to the most vulnerable, working with them to get into a pathway to housing. Once we've like located, okay, this person is highly vulnerable, lots of stuff going on. Let's get them into the system and start working with them and getting them housing ready, and then walk with them as they transition off the streets into housing. So it's kind of a key journey right there. It's a lot of legwork that happens. So that's a lot of what our work happens there. And then once housing becomes available through another organization, we kind of do this warm handoff. And then that's where our home fullness program came, because we're like, oh, we still want to be friends. We still want to walk alongside folks. So we're not going to just like, see you later, you graduated or whatever. It's like, no, we're going to continue that relationship. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question on the collaboration.
100%. Yeah. Over the last 5 years or so, as I've been traveling the US and getting to learn about different programs and things that have been created for helping in a variety of different ways, I've really been able to boil it down to 3 different tiers. Tier 1 is like the meeting of immediate need. Yeah. Getting people what they need to survive and to think a little bit further down the road. Totally. Tier 2 is like programs where people can transition in a healthy way. That's not necessarily a rehab, but something that can help people get involved in a small community and have a place to go and kind of live, function. And then the third is the housing. Yeah. Totally. And so I've looked at all 3, and, you have people that are like, our way is the best. It's like, well, people that are really trying to help someone transition completely off the street and not just maintain a business model understands the power of the collaboration that needs to happen. Totally. And so it sounds like you guys are doing that, of kind of walking through those processes and working with other organizations that are kind of providing and filling in some of the gaps to help somebody actually get off the street. Does anyone come to mind of somebody who's gone through the process?
Oh, like somebody that we've walked through the whole process? Oh my gosh. I mean, let me think of a fun story. Well, gosh, man, some of my favorite stories are folks with families, and it's not like a sealed up in a bow story though. You know what I mean? It's like you're dealing with like a long standing amount of trauma and crisis that's just been like, oh my gosh. But the folks that we can think of that, like, okay, there's one family that really makes me smile, and I'll just spare the names, I don't want to, put all that out there, but it was a family, a mom and dad, and then a daughter. And man, it was crazy. We were doing our Monday night outreach, and all of a sudden we hear these screams, like a kid screaming. And I'm like, that's not a normal thing that happens on a Monday. We've seen a lot of things, of course, on Monday nights, but not a child screaming. So I'm like running to find this screaming child. And it turns out this child is autistic, and that's how she communicates, just like screaming really loud. And she's really excited about something. I'm like, oh, thank God. And so I met the parents, and I was like, hey, so what's going on? How you guys doing tonight? They're like, man, we just left the shelter that they were staying in. They were unsafe. Like, they were literally being threatened inside the shelter, and the dad wasn't even allowed in the shelter. It was just a family shelter. And so he was camping in a tent like 100 feet from the shelter so he could be close to his family. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I have kids, and my heart was already breaking. The kid was just screaming at the top of her lungs. And I can understand that would create some tension, right? So like, we just left, we don't know where to go. We're starving. So we found out that we can get a meal here, and we're like, okay, you're not staying on the streets tonight. So we immediately, worked in getting them into just emergency hotel. We're like, let's just get you in a hotel, and then we'll sort things out tomorrow, because, our outreaches are in the evening. So then the next day we start working on processes. We're working on that. So over about 2 weeks, we're working on getting them, some really cool resources bolted to them. And I don't know if you remember this, there was a tornado that like ripped through here.
Yeah, I did hear about that. Not too long ago.
Yeah. So a tornado came through and literally ripped the ceiling, like the roof off of the hotel they were staying in. So I texted them, and I was like, hey, are you guys okay? where are you guys at? I didn't know because it literally like ripped through the night. And I got a text back like, please come. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I jumped in my car. I'm like driving over rubble. I mean, it was chaos around here. There's like, electrical lines down and everything. So I'm driving like over electrical lines and I see their hotel and it's like rubble on one side and the roof is gone. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I like run straight to their room and they're sitting on their bed and there's water leaking there's like a scene out of a movie, water leaking out of the ceiling. And I'm like, are you guys okay? They're just like, yeah, we don't know what to do. Like, are we allowed to stay here? I was like, no, this building's about to fall over. So we get them out, get them into the American Red Cross had started to spin up. I had a friend over there. I was calling her collaboration. I was like, hey, we got a family getting, in the main, like big congregant shelter is probably not a good idea for this family. And here's why. And she's like, okay, let me work on that. She calls back. She's like, hey, I got a good spot. There's like a room, a side room. We can give them a private room. We'll give them cots, everything that they need. So we got them over there. This is crazy. It's funny. It's just telling the story. It's like reliving it. It was such a wild, like few days. Get them into Red Cross. And we're still continuing to try to find, some things to tie to, some resources to tie to them. And then finally be able to now collaborate with another organization called Project Connect here in town. They were like, hey, we have, access to get these folks into like a kind of rental assistance program and then also a job enrichment program. And so it was really cool to see this family go, all right, let's do it. And they moved into this house, an apartment rather. And then mom started going to this job enrichment thing. Dad was watching the kid. And then they, both were kind of growing their own businesses. And then I remember like, I was like, man, when people say like, well, when do you like high five? When do you like, man, job well done? I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't necessarily feel like job well done. I just feel like, hey man, we're doing a good job of journeying with people. But I did feel a little bit of like this, like job well done when she had texted and she'd been working in like food service. And the presidential debate came through Nashville and she texted, she's like, I just served food for the future president's, entourage. I was like, well, shoot, man, that's pretty awesome. She's like, I had a great day. She's like, I got to see, Trump and Biden, going at it. And I was like, man, okay. Like that, I don't think job well done at that point. Cause like, this isn't like a checkbox kind of organization. We're like, let's journey with people, as long as we need to, with the
it's
best
nice to have some wins.
Yeah.
It's nice to have some like hope.
Yeah, man. And it's beautiful. I mean, they're killing it. She's like, dude, she could run for president. I feel like she is just strong, dude. Strong. And it's unbelievable to watch people, the resiliency on the streets, folks that you got to imagine the amount of creativity that you need to have to live on the streets, especially during COVID.
Yeah.
Like you have to be resilient and creative and like innovative. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
man.
I just interviewed somebody yesterday and he was saying that he went and spent a month living on the streets. He was saying how he was blown away by how strong the community is.
Yeah, it's deep, man.
Like not only are they going through building that resilience, but they're building this kind of camaraderie between the community of living on the streets, caring for one another.
It's crazy.
So when I think of Nashville, Nashville is such an incredible city, man. My wife and I were even looking at moving out here at one point and it's rapidly growing. Oh yeah. With all of the growth and all of the excitement of things that are going on and everything, how has that affected the homeless situation here in the city?
Yeah, totally.
When you think of the amount of people moving here and neighborhoods shifting around and development happening. Yeah. From your perspective, what's going on? And also, can you describe gentrification? Yeah, sure. And kind of what that's like here in Nashville.
Totally. I would never say that I'm a professional in this. I'm just like an old roadie, but I'm seeing things and I'll report on what I'm seeing. Yeah. So over the past, probably 4 years, I've seen this city change and it continues to change. It was like there was something that happened and then all of a sudden it's just like cranes everywhere, building like large buildings. It's just like one after the next and it's still happening. So massive growth in our city. And I live, about 5 miles from the city center. So I can like see it from like my front yard. I literally can see like downtown. I'm like, oh my gosh, watching just the construction and things happening and changing, my neighborhood changing, houses being knocked down and bigger houses, 2 houses on one lot, that sort of stuff. And yeah, there's like a density factor that's happening here where, we used to be kind of a small town as a small town. Now it's like, we're becoming a big city that used to be a small town. I'm not sure exactly where we are on that spectrum right now, but we are definitely growing. And with that comes, I think a lot of folks that are new, a lot of folks that are old. And I wouldn't say it's a bad clash, but there's a good, there's a bit of a tension that came with that, and I think that there's certain neighborhoods in regards to those experiencing homelessness that are saying, okay, hang on a second, we're feeling the squeeze. And now we're looking at okay, we can't have people living in the woods next to our neighborhood, and there's a lot of conversation that happens around this. Yeah. It's very interesting because you have folks that are seeing that, and they're seeing, public property or even sometimes private property being taken over by folks that are experiencing homelessness. But the truth of the matter is that we're just taking away more and more opportunities for people just to exist, and it's okay, well, if we take away, let's say, this area or this geographical chunk of land and say, you cannot camp here anymore, you can't live here anymore. So what happens? I mean, we all know this, people will move like water. If you take away an opportunity for water to be in one place, it doesn't, well, I guess it can evaporate, but humans don't necessarily evaporate, but they'll have to move. Right? Yeah. It'll move, it'll shift, it'll direct. And so
there's no progress. There's just mobilization to one place to another.
Totally. And so it's moving. And you can imagine, I mean, gosh, I had a tiny, small opportunity to experience this just for an hour the other day where I was working at this event and I was like, man, I just didn't want to sit down just by myself for a second. And I literally tried to sit down in 3 different places and a security guard came up and said, hey, you can't sit there. And I'm like, oh man. So I went to another place. They're like, hey, if you want to sit here, you have to have a mask on. And I was like, oh crap, I don't even have a mask right now. It's like, okay, well, I'll move over here. And they're like, oh, you can't stay here. You're going to have to move, somewhere else. And I'm like, holy crap. And that was just for 1 hour. And I remember just feeling I just wanted to scream and be like, I can't even find a bench to sit on right now. And I just wanted to find fresh air and just chill. And it was wet. And so there's just a whole thought of it just gave me a moment of man, the friends and neighbors that we serve, this is every day, all day for a lot of folks. And so the thought that, our city is actually moving towards eliminating areas for people to live, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's maddening for me because I'm like, okay, if we're going to take this away, we have to offer something else.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of people that are pushing for, okay, take this away. People shouldn't live here. And they're saying, and this, we're all on the same page about this. This isn't dignified. Mm-hmm. People shouldn't be living in this sort of,
situation in the first place.
Yeah. It's terrible. Oh my gosh, why would this even be a thing that we would vote for? We're not voting for this. What we're saying is if you make this illegal, you can't camp here or anywhere, then what are you saying? You're saying, oh, you got to go to resources or shelters, right? Well, let me just break that down. And I almost guarantee you that this is not just Nashville. This has got to be everywhere. Okay, if you force people into shelters, you know what the shelters are saying right now when it's not illegal? The shelters are saying, number 1, we're full. They're also saying, number 2, we're understaffed. There's also saying, number 3, we need more resources. We need more help. We're these nonprofit organizations begging the community for money. And then guess what? The government is coming down and saying hey, guess we're going to make this harder.
Yeah.
We're going to increase the need of the community and you need to address it.
Yeah.
And we're not the only community in the US that the city, metropolitan governments, or even the state governments rely on nonprofits to do the work of resources in their city. So you get what I'm saying here? Yeah. It's okay, government says, no, it's illegal. So that forces people into resources. Resources are already overtapped, full to the brim, bursting at the seams. And you're forcing that. And I'm telling you, God bless our legislators and God bless anybody who works on policy on that work. But you have to see the reality of what's going on here. I understand that makes sense. It makes sense. Okay, let's make it illegal. It'll force people to either go to other options or move into resources. But there's not enough resources for what we have right now, much less making it harder.
Yeah, and it makes sense when you're disengaged from the ground.
It makes sense. I have grace for that.
Yeah.
Because I get to do this every day now, and I didn't a few years ago. And even now, my increased awareness of this, I'm like, guys, and I hate it. It's like, I feel like we've done the best that we can to try to communicate to these legislators, communicate to as high up as we possibly can. And it's like, dude, I don't think that you understand here. So then let's just play it out. What's going to happen? Okay, if the resources are already tapped out, there's not enough staff, not enough money, not enough capacity, right? And if we're talking about skyrocketing mental illness, skyrocketing, substance use issues, like, okay, so then what happens? People are just going to move like water. And then we've seen it in other cities, and we've seen some folks that's like, oh gosh, for some cities, like literally like the tents are being set up on like main drags because there's nowhere else to set tents up. There's nowhere else.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is that dignified? Is that more dignified than living over here?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm really cranking up the heat.
No, I appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate it because it needs to be addressed, and it needs to also come from the perspective of people who are on the ground doing stuff.
Yeah.
Which is a big motivator of why I wanted to start this podcast, because we need to hear from the people that are doing the work and on the ground and connecting with people, because that perspective is really important. And, I'm also not a finger pointer,
Me neither,
in the sense of, I think it's good to hear the perspective of the reality of things, but then immediately ask the question, what is it that I can do?
Right. Totally.
And so for the people who are listening to this podcast that live in Nashville, what can they do?
Yeah, totally.
As an individual, what is ways that you would recommend getting involved, being a part of the solution?
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Yeah. So there's so many different opportunities I think people have. So it's like, I'll reach for the top on this first answer is like, all right, if you own an apartment building, or if you have rental units, you have the opportunity to leverage those units to say, okay, you know what? Affordable housing is a big buzzword. It's like, okay, well, who's done something about affordable housing? It's like, yeah, there's government incentive, there's tax incentive, all that sort of stuff. But you can participate in that as a private owner, as a private citizen. If you're shaking your fist about going like, hey, we need more affordable housing, and you actually have units, you can participate in that and say, okay, I have a unit, I have 2 units, I have 10 units, I have 30 units, 50 units. And there's a way that you can actually call the government, like metro government, and say, I want to be part of this list. And you can say, I just want to be, I want to offer my resources, whatever that is. So affordable housing. Oh man, I just lost the link. I'm going to give that link to you to maybe you can put it on there.
Yeah,
it's kind of a long link to make sure, because I don't want to screw it up while we're recording this, but I want to make sure I have the right link. So you can go to this link and you can literally go, all right, I got a unit or 2 or 5, and say, this is just going to be affordable housing or attainable housing. Right. So then the next step down, if you're like, dude, I don't own apartment buildings, what do I do? You can be a part of the relief effort, but then also diving into organizations and supporting the organizations that are building and developing, developing affordable housing or developing opportunities for affordable housing. There's tons of nonprofits here. There's us, People Loving Nashville. I mean, even like Salvation Army is doing that work. Our friends at Park Center, Community Cares Fellowship, Centerstone, Catholic Charities, Step Up on Second. I mean, there's a ton, and I'm leaving like 5 off. Oasis, there's tons of organizations. Like you can literally just type in like Homeless Resources Nashville, and you can see a list of nonprofits that are doing this and working in that space. So I would definitely say like, hey, help support, because if you can't supply what we need, which is housing inventory, I would say the top needs would be housing inventory, mental health resources, and substance use resources. If you can't supply any of those 3 things, which is fine, then support those that can. You know what I mean? And then if you're like, I want to get on the ground, I want to like jump in and help you guys like with my hands and my feet, I think that's awesome. Our organization, we love doing that. We love inviting anybody, and we say, hey, leverage what you have like in front of you. Like we kind of take the cue from the Bible where it's like, okay, if I have talents to leverage, let's leverage that for what we call the kingdom of God, like our people. Leverage that and say like, oh, okay, well, I'm a painter. Okay.
So you do get people plugged in based on skill.
Totally. Like, I mean, my friend Jessica, like she is an amazing painter. We brought her in and she's working with the restoration program that we have. She did like painting class, like art therapy, for folks that just transitioned off the streets. They painted these beautiful sunsets. And there was one guy that was like, I'll paint the sunset, but I'm going to paint this thing all on top of it. And he just did his own thing.
That's art.
Yeah, totally. Like he literally just made his own thing. And I was like, this is awesome. So we have friends that do that. And even another friend, you know, and I tell the story a lot, but I have a friend that was like, hey man, I love to read. I'm going to bring a bunch of books. And it's just, she made the give and take, you know, a library that we've had for like 10 years on the streets. Some folks are really into actually fashion and styling, and they actually volunteer with our clothing teams, like especially for our women's clothing team, where they every Monday, like they're helping get, you know, dignification to those that are living on the streets. It's like, hey, we're not just going to give a shirt and pants out. It's like, hey, let's, you know, what do you prefer? How do you like to dress? And like, let us help you do that. And so we have some really cool volunteers that have come in that, more ladies getting involved with that, and bringing just like a night of dignification and be like, wow, you look really nice tonight. You know, this outfit really, you know, it compliments you well. You know, that sort of stuff where I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's really cool grassroots opportunities. I'll say anything, like try us. Just try us. Be like, you know, I'm a really good golfer. You know what? Bring somebody out on the golf course and just having, you know, let's just.
That's not me, I'll tell you that.
Me neither, brother.
So where can people sign up?
Yeah. PeopleLovingNashville.com.
Cool.
Yeah, we're a .com, not a .org.
Nice.
Yeah. We just did that early and just kept it. So.
Disruptive. I love it.
Yeah, right. People are like, how come you're not in .org? I'm like, I don't know. It costs money to do another thing. Like, we'd rather spend it on housing for people.
Man.
So.
Well, dude, thank you so much for spending time and really, really amazing work here in Nashville.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation, man. I think a lot of people listening to this are going to be inspired, but I also hope that the people here in Nashville will get involved and be able to use their skills or resources to contribute to the solution, man.
Love it,
and thank you for providing that opportunity for people and being a solid leader in the community.
Man, thank you. Thank you.
Last question I do want to ask you though is, why local for you? Why is it important for people to take initiative and action locally? Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll say for my answer for that and for myself, and then what I would say for others is it's right in front of your face. You know, I haven't come across, I used to travel for a living. I never came across a city where I was like, oh, it looks like they're not struggling with any poverty here. You know, every city has some sort of, and it might look different from one city to the next. And that I think that, you know, I mean, this is the way that like my scriptures will guide me. But even if you're not a believer, if you're not a Christian, it's like, whatever. This is still something I think it's very universal as human. Like we're built for connection. We're built for like actual relationship. Like I know your name and you know my name and I say hello and at least just connect eyes with you. There's something that's really magical about that I think we were designed for. Whatever your belief in whatever design, you know, happened, whether it was naturally or not, it's like, okay, we're built for connection. And I would say if you're not tapping into that you might be missing something. I'm not saying that you're like, you know, going to go to hell or that you're like worthless person. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like, man, there's a really cool thing. And I would say, come taste and see what that looks like to share parts of yourself and then find somebody else to share parts of themselves in a real connection. And that can only happen when it's in your backyard or somebody else's backyard that's locally. Because you can do the once a year thing. That's great. I am totally for that. But you could also do something like literally every week if you want on your commute to work.
Yeah. Somebody, I just heard this quote recently. I believe it's from Terrence Lester out in Atlanta. He was like, service is not an event, it's a lifestyle.
Well, yeah. I would agree.
But yeah, man, thank you for spending time. Yeah, if you live in Nashville and you want to get involved, visit peoplelovingnashville.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Love Your City podcast. If you want to find ways to get involved in your community, you can visit loveyourcity.org. If you have any questions or recommendations of grassroots leaders or nonprofits that we should be aware of, email us at media@loveyourcity.org.